Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Uh, and thank you again to Alan and Laura and the whole team for all that you guys are doing to pull this together and the presentation that you have and the time you've put in for this morning, for this meeting, and for all that you continue to do for this process. And of course, thank you to you, Taiwo, for your perseverance and for all you're doing out and about in the community for this process. But especially thanks to everybody here today who both the new folks. I want to welcome the new folks and I'm thrilled that you're here. This is a very collegial and good group to work with. We've been together now for a number of years, and as usual, I want to thank and commend the group for their perseverance and their continued engagement in this. It's so important to have these voices in the room and to have your input in this process. It's so important to Charlotte, and I say this a lot, but from a process standpoint, we are doing this the absolute right best practice way by being so inclusive, being so transparent, and being so rigorous. And I think it's a model for communities all over the world. So I commend you all for doing that. And by doing that process, we are going to get to a result. It's going to lead us to a good result that everyone understands and has ownership of and is great for Charlotte. So thank you all, and glad you're here and looking forward to a productive meeting today. Taiwo?
Thank you, Tony. We appreciate you serving as our chair. It's been like multiple years now, but you kept doing this. So we're really grateful for your leadership. And I also want to echo a lot of your sentiments and say thank you to all of you. Every time that I've called in, I've seen consistency in participation and attendance, and that's really been very helpful for us. There's a lot that's riding on this UDO. I believe that now people are beginning to talk a lot more about the UDO than they did last year. I mean, the focus a lot was on the comprehensive plan, but as we are getting to this phase, people are beginning to talk about it. I also think people are beginning to confuse even more now the comprehensive plan and the UDO, because some people just don't know the difference. But I think once the plan is adopted in April, and we go into place types mapping, and you are going towards the approval or adoption of the UDO, I think it gets clearer to people, in people's mind, how important this is. And so we really want to appreciate all your efforts. I know we're not done yet, we're not there yet, but we won't get to the very end until, without your help. So really appreciate your consistency, your ability to come every time and provide really insightful ideas. So I'm going to be listening, as always, reading the charts and the comments and the questions as they come in. So thank you very much once again. I'll hand it back to Laura and Alan.
Thank you, Ty and Tony. So let's get started with our presentation. And today we'll be talking about the Neighborhood 2 place type zoning districts. So these, at our last meeting, which was way back in November, we spoke about the Neighborhood 1 zoning districts, our lower density residential neighborhoods, and our Neighborhood 2 place type will be higher density residential, predominantly residential neighborhoods. And we've got some zoning districts that go with that place type. But as always, we will be recording and are recording this meeting, and we'll post a link to it on our YouTube page within the next few days, and we'll send out a notice to you when we do that. And again, as always, I think it's been working fairly well for us to have an ongoing chat, feedback conversation. So as we go, we can, you can enter your comments or questions in chat, and our team will try to respond as well as we can keep up with them, and we'll probably stop and at a couple of points along the way and just open it up for additional conversation. So pretty much the way we've been doing that over the last couple of meetings, I think, has been working fairly well for us. So getting back, in these first few slides are a review, as we always try to do. We try to review just because you guys don't work with this every day the way that we do. So you've got your own thing going on. And so just as a review, our comp plan, our Charlotte Future 2040 comp plan, which the public draft is out there now for comment, sets some policies for residential areas. And these are result in some place types. And for our residential areas, these are our neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 place types. And then you'll remember, hopefully from the last meeting, for our neighborhood 1 zoning districts, we had several. And we also had some proposed overlay districts. So in addition to our N1A, B, C, D, E, and F, we had a cottage court overlay, a neighborhood character overlay, and a residential infill overlay. So we've talked about those at our last meeting. Our neighborhood 2, which is where we'll go today, we've only got 3 zoning districts. Neighborhood 2, N2, A, B, and C, and we'll go into those in some depth in this presentation. Again, as a reminder, the neighborhood, the 1 and 2 are part of the live place types, live, work, play, and so these are in our live place types. They're predominantly residential place types. And then at the last meeting, we went over some of our dwelling definitions, and there was some confusion, not only with you, but with us as well, I think, over the distinction between a dwelling duplex and a dwelling twin home. And even though there is a distinction, it wasn't all that important to create the confusion by trying to have 2 separate definitions. So we've gotten rid of the dwelling twin home use, and any building that's got 2 dwelling units in it will now be referred to as a dwelling dash duplex, or a duplex dwelling if you're speaking regular English. So we're going to call those duplexes. A single family, obviously we know what those are. A triplex, just again as a quick review, is a dwelling with 3 dwelling units in it, and a quad with 4 units. A townhouse is a structure of 3 or more dwelling units that's configured such that the units are separated by a party wall, and each dwelling unit comes with a separate sublot. That's a distinction between a townhome and the multifamily dwelling attached, which may look like a townhome, but each unit doesn't have its own sublot. The entire building is located on a lot. So a little bit of a distinction, but it does matter in some ways legally. So we treat them a little bit differently in our ordinance. And a multifamily stacked versus attached, where they're attached side by side. Stacked is obviously they are multi-story and different units on different floors. A multi-dwelling development simply means a residential development with more than 1 structure, that it consists of different types of dwellings. So you may have a multifamily stacked structure on the same development parcel as a townhome, or a multifamily attached, or some other types of dwellings, triplexes, quadruplexes, and so forth. And then an ADU, or an accessory dwelling unit, is simply an additional dwelling unit that is part of typically a single family or a duplex I need to change that slide to get that twin home out of there because we got rid of that one. So ignore the twin home. An ADU can go on the same parcel as either a single family or a duplex. And to review some of our high-level policies on neighborhood 2 place types, the goal is to provide a moderate to higher intensity, a range of moderate to higher intensity housing types. The land uses are typically multifamily and single family attached as the primary uses. Also some townhomes. Lower intensity are also included, especially as part of a large development with a mix of housing types, so that mixed dwelling that we talked about. Neighborhood 2 can also include civic uses such as schools, parks, and religious institutions. It's characterized by low to mid-rise multifamily buildings in a walkable environment, larger scale typically than what we would have found in a neighborhood 1. And we would also expect to find shared amenities. And because neighborhood 2 place types can serve as a transition between a lower density and a higher intensity, either commercial or mixed use centers, they should have a well-connected and dense street network with short blocks, and obviously designed to support and encourage walking, cycling, and transit use. Laura, I think I have stepped all over you because I think these were the slides that you were supposed to cover for us.
Well, Alan, you want to keep going before we hand it off to Camiros?
I'll keep going because I think
right.
this is the last slide before we hand it off to Camiros.
No problem.
So I apologize. I've only got 2 monitors because I'm working from home, and typically so I can't, I don't always see all the information that I need to run this thing. So I apologize for that. So as I mentioned earlier, our neighborhood 2 place types we've created 3 zoning districts that we think will be appropriate for use in that place type depending on the context and the location. So N2A, N2B, and N2C, they are all either townhome or townhome multifamily districts. So this is where we'll hand it over to Camiros to cover some of the details of these districts.
All right, thanks, Alan. I want to preface my portion of the discussion today by saying it's a snow day here. I understand that there's been a little bit of weather in Charlotte too, but there's a 3-year-old running around here who might make an appearance, and hopefully he will be fully clothed if that happens. Just want to get into some of the details of these N2 districts. The structure of this presentation will be familiar if you followed us on the previous couple. Really just want to talk about a little bit about how the land use policy has informed what we have come up with in terms of the regulations and our district structure. So coming out of the place types, again, we've got some good guidance in terms of the primary uses within the neighborhood 2 place type are multifamily and single family attached residential, as well as some potentially non-residential uses on the ground floor in certain areas. Lower intensity housing types, so basically all those housing types below multifamily townhouse that Alan discussed would be allowed in here as well in certain conditions. And the place type would also include civic uses, again, like the neighborhood 1, like schools, neighborhood parks, and religious institutions. So the N2A district that we have created is essentially designed to be a townhome and attached multifamily residential district that would allow other low intensity uses. So single family homes, duplexes, moving right on up the scale there. The intent is that this would accommodate larger townhome developments than can be accommodated through the N1F district, which, if you'd recall, was sort of that smaller scale townhome multifamily district that was included within the neighborhood 1 place type. This would also allow for a development bonus, which we're still in the process of crafting. The details of those are quite kind of difficult to move through. So we're in the process of refining that. But the idea at this point is that certain standards included in here, like building length maximums or open space minimums, would be able to be deviated from through requiring point tally, similar to how we've done it in TOD. So based upon that same basic structure, you'd be able to achieve a development bonus for certain site aspects within the N2A. Next slide, please. Kind of moving up the ramp of intensity here, we've got the N2B district. So this one is predominantly a townhouse multifamily district that is a little bit more intense, a little bit more of an urban kind of tighter character than the N2A. So if the N2A is sort of a non-urban townhouse and low intensity dwelling unit district, then the N2B is kind of a middle intensity district. So this one would allow townhouses and multifamily development, as well as lower intensity, but in order to do something like a lower intensity duplex or single family, it needs to be a component of a multi-dwelling development. So as Alan spoke about, a multi-dwelling development is basically 2 or more buildings, residential dwellings on a lot in a coordinated, sort of a unified coordinated design of the buildings and the open space. This one would also be subject to a development bonus that's still being worked out, again, for things like additional length or deviation from the open space requirements. And then finally, we have the N2C, which is the most sort of intense residential zoning district. And this one is basically the most urban district. So the standards that you'll see in here reflect kind of a much more urban context in terms of how we're anticipating that this will be mapped and utilized. So it's characterized by reduced setbacks from those first 2 districts and increased allowed height. The development standards within here, as I mentioned, are geared toward a more urban context. So we're anticipating that this will be used for sort of larger scale, sort of mixed use multifamily developments that are a little bit closer to the street, really achieving that urban character that can transition to and from our centers. Again, there would be a development bonus included here for those first 2 items that we discussed for the N2A and B, as well as some additional height here in the N2C, because we're anticipating that that's something that would be desirable. And this is the only one of the neighborhood districts, the N2 districts, that would include a build-to zone, because again, we're trying to really acknowledge the areas of the city where this is anticipated to be mapped are sort of a more urban character. So we've come up with some draft dimensional standards for each one of these districts. These are all included within the draft, so I will spare you from reading down through a list. So they include things like minimum lot area and lot width that you see here, as well as building coverage. And these are all, this is sort of our first cut at tailoring these to the form and the intent that was communicated through the place types. So you'll see each one of these standards will kind of vary based on the dwelling type and on the district in which it's located. So, you know, we moved from minimum lot area for townhome and multifamily attached of 3,500 square feet in the N2A and N2B to things like non-residential minimum lot areas. Again, like I said, I'm not going to walk through the list because I don't think any of us will digest it, but you can all read it in the draft. We've got some building siting standards. Again, as I mentioned, you'll see that those are, you know, if you can kind of read through and digest, you'll see that they're really geared toward achieving those sort of variations in form between the districts that we had talked about a little bit earlier. Things like minimum setback lines based on street type as well as district. We've got build-to zones. Again, that would only be applicable to the N2C. So we're saying in there, for instance, that your building needs to be 0 to 20 feet from the minimum setback line. And then we have minimum side setbacks and rear setbacks. Again, those are all geared toward the form that we're seeking to achieve. And there are some context-sensitive standards built in there as well, such as the 10 feet in the N2C actually gets bumped up to 20 feet if I'm abutting a range within the N1 district. So we've built in some context sensitivities in here as well. We've got articulation standards as well. These will seem familiar too. Things like maximum building height for residential and non-residential structures. Maximum building height with a bonus that you'll notice for N2C is up to 100 feet. You're allowed 65 feet in there, up to 100 with the bonus. The first two we're anticipating would be 40 feet for residential uses, 48 for non-residential. And then again, pulling over a current standard, which is allowing you to ramp up a little bit for your non-residential use the further that you're located from your setback. We've got maximum building length in here. These numbers come from the maximums as well as the preferred block lengths within the place types in the comprehensive plan. And then you'll start to see some more kind of urban standards geared toward the N2B and the N2C. So things like ground floor transparency, minimum ground floor heights, upper floor transparencies for all of these, and then blank wall. So we're really also, trying to focus on making sure that, given the context of some of these, they could be, sort of a more urban style development or a little bit more spread out, but we still want to have basic pedestrian friendly. We're including open. These should look somewhat familiar to you as well. So we're requiring open space in these districts for all multifamily stacked, multifamily attached, townhouse, non-residential, and mixed-use development. And again, those are sort of modulated based on the district that you're in, as well as your dwelling type. So the basics of this are that essentially anywhere where we're allowing multifamily stacked or non-residential and mixed use, we're just requiring a straight 10% of your lot area to go to open space. If I'm doing townhouse or multifamily attached development, I have to provide a little bit more, 400 square feet in the N2A, just given the kind of form and character that we're looking for there. And then those are reduced in the N2B and the N2C to 150 square feet per unit to acknowledge that those are anticipated to be a little bit more dense or a little bit more intense and urban in character as we move up to the N2C. Important to note too that when we're talking about open space, there are design standards that are included in the draft that basically communicate the standards for each one of those open space types that you see listed there. So you can provide this as private, common, or public open space, each of which is subject to its own set of standards. Finally, we've got a bunch of additional standards in here that we wanted to walk you through. These are located in different parts of the draft, so this list might seem a little bit disjointed, but just bear with me because this is important stuff that we just wanted to make sure we weren't missing in our presentation here. Driveways. So first of all, a lot of these are going to be related to site layout and design, such as this first one here, which is driveways, maneuvering areas, and parking areas. So in these districts, those things are prohibited between the front facade of the structure and the street. So I can't have a driveway, I can't have a parking area between the front facade of my structure and the street. Surface parking spaces we're requiring to be located to the rear of buildings. We're requiring that vehicular entrances to garages are also located to the rear of the building and can't face the front facade of another building, and also can't face anything that's considered to be common open space within that development. Importantly, that does not apply to townhomes. We realize that there are certain things that we can't do in North Carolina due to the design aesthetics law, so we can't make something like that apply to townhomes. This next bullet here on development sites of 30 acres or more. So fairly large development sites in the N2A and N2B districts, we're really strongly encouraging a mixture of dwelling types within those. So what we're saying is that if you're doing a big development in either one of those districts, that no one dwelling type can constitute more than 2/3 of the total units. So you can't do a monolithic townhome development, you can't do a monolithic multifamily attached development. You got to provide a little bit of variety in terms of the housing types that you're providing if you're doing a larger development in the N2A or the N2B. Principal structures directly abutting a street or public path must be oriented toward the street or public path. This is something that you'll see kind of brought up in a few different places as you read through the draft. We're really requiring that orientation toward the street or a public path here in the N2 as an important component. All the principal structures must abut a street, public path, or common open space. It's another important component. And primary pedestrian entries to each principal structure or to each dwelling unit that's accessed directly from the exterior of the building have to face a street or a public path. Finally, the next two, the maximum number of attached dwelling units within a single structure here in the N2 is 8. You'll recall in the N1 it was 5. So we're allowing a little bit more intensity here. That is unless you're adjacent to N1A through N1D, in which case it's reduced back to that N1 standard, a little bit of context sensitivity. Multifamily and non-residential buildings are going to be subject to design standards, and you'll also see those within the draft. They're similar to those in TOD, but they've been sort of aligned with our overall sort of character and form goals here within the N2 district.
Okay, I've gotten a text from Laura. You may notice that Laura's not with us. She is having Wi-Fi trouble and was forced to drop off this meeting. And her last text that she said that she is calling Spectrum Cable. So I don't expect that she'll be back with us anytime soon, which is unfortunate because I know she was going to be very helpful in trying to address some of these questions and comments. So I'm hoping that she can join us eventually, but let's press on. Again, the slide on the screen now is a review of what happens with these zoning districts. So after the comprehensive plan is adopted, we will map the place types citywide, and this will be done by the comprehensive plan team. It's not part of the UDO effort. So they will assign a place type to every parcel in the city, and it will generally take the place of our future land use recommendations on our maps. And at the point when the UDO is adopted and old zoning districts will no longer exist, all of our parcels that have a conventional zoning attached to them will need to translate to one of the new UDO zoning districts. And so that will happen as a translation, direct translation from old zoning district to new zoning district. And then the third phase of that is that that translation may not be the best zoning district for that particular parcel based on place types. So we may need, well, not may, we will need to go back and do a series of alignment rezonings, again, citywide. This is a similar process to what we did when we adopted our new TOD districts last year. All of our old conventional TOD translated immediately to TOD CC. And then we went back and adjusted and applied the 4 different TOD standards. And then we did an alignment rezoning where we rezoned all of the parcels in the entire blue length corridor if they were recommended for TOD. We rezoned a TOD. So think of that process, only think of it instead of rezoning 1,500 plus parcels, more like thousands and thousands of parcels. So that will be a process that goes on as part of the UDO implementation, and we won't start that until the comp plan has been adopted later this year. And again, this is a kind of a companion slide to that, just illustrating that, for example, if your current zoning is R17 multifamily, and once the UDO is adopted, that zoning district won't exist anymore. But based on place type mapping, it could translate to perhaps an N2B district instead, which is the kind of the medium intensity multifamily district that we just talked about, or the R43, which is a higher density multifamily district. When that ceases to exist, perhaps that district or that particular area translates to the N2C, which is the new UDO highest intensity zoning district. So I think you'll follow that logic. And then I also wanted to call attention to, on this example map, and it's purely an example, there are some conditional districts, the MUD CD or the BD CD or even the B1 CD. Because those are conditional districts tied to a specific site plan and those areas have gone through public engagement, public hearing, city council votes. We're not automatically going to translate all of those to one of the new UDO districts at this time, because we need to look at those on a case-by-case basis to see what those conditions are. There may be things in there that we need to keep or want to keep as conditions. And so we just don't want to wipe those out by immediately translating those areas to a new conventional zoning district. So this is the point where we stop and try to catch up with all of the comments and questions that have been raised in the chat box. And I see that we have quite a few to work our way through. So some of these I know that Arista has been working on responding to. So I'll go back to near the beginning. Nate asked when the comp plan comments are due, and Laura promised to send that information to her, and David thanks us for clarifying about duplexes, and we thank you for bringing that to our attention so that we were able to do that. Matt Langston back at 11:51 wanted to know how intensity was determined, and will the housing types be tied to a maximum density as well? No, we don't. We're not using any density standards in the UDO in any of our zoning districts. If you can build it on the site according to our other standards, dimensional standards and so forth, then you can build it. If it will fit, then yes, it doesn't matter what the residential density is. And that goes, I think, across the board for all of our UDO zoning districts. Arista, you're muted.
Sorry, I did stick in a response to that because I know we use intensity to talk about going from N2A to N2C. And really where you see that intensity kind of ramp up, as Chris has said, is kind of in the other standards that are in place, whether that be things like height or setbacks. And then in addition, you see how the dwelling types change. So you see you've got a mix in the N2A. You're really only allowing the other one, single family duplex within a multi-dwelling development in the N2B. And then in the N2C, you've really kind of limited it to townhouse and multifamily. So that's how you see that intensity change. But like Alan said, there is no max density associated with the districts.
And Allison has commented, responding that there's a lot of review of city initiatives going on now. Boy, is there ever. And we'll start publishing comments we receive on February 1st and regularly update. And I'm assuming that that's in response to Nate's question about the comp plan. And
yes, that's true. That's going to go online on February 1st.
Okay. And Nate wants some examples of these. Well, since we haven't mapped place types yet, I would be hesitant, but let me dig into the rest of your comment.
Alan, like, is there a project, a garden multifamily project, just some context around what you're thinking about, real world, something that's built in Charlotte. It might not meet all the design requirements, but just scale and everything would be helpful.
For an N2 project or for a multi-dwelling?
For all of them. The differences between districts.
The districts. We can do that. We can
understand what the difference is. Like, what are you actually picturing with all these words getting built?
Yeah.
We can do that knowing that some of the standards will be different. I mean, it's not always a direct correlation, but let us see what we can get. And thank you. I think we've provided that on other districts before when you guys have asked, and I think we just overlooked it this time. So and I think that sorry, I lost internet. So when I saw your comment, you had said it is into B, more kind of the garden variety multifamily, and yes, and then into C being more your really much more urban multifamily 4 or 5 stories type bonus even more. So I hate to bring up a specific example, but if you look at N2C, there's the project across from, so, but I'm going to anyway, Strawberry Hill on Providence Road
Yep.
that Raven did. So that would be an example of an N2C, I think.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Thomas Hapapuro at 1152, suggestion for bonus is to reduce setbacks in all districts if tree save or other environmental elements are increased. In some cases, well, perhaps not in N2A or B, but in some cases setbacks are tied to the streetscape requirements, and not in all cases, obviously. So, Thomas, do you want to elaborate on a little bit more on what you mean by how would these setbacks be reduced? And
Yeah. So, I saw that the setbacks in N2B are 27 foot, if I remember correctly, a pretty big setback. And to your comment about that setback is tied to streetscape, most likely our streetscapes are going to be, 8 foot planting strip, 8 foot sidewalk. So that's only 16 foot. So you've still got, quite a number of feet that aren't being utilized for anything other than just pushing buildings back somewhat arbitrarily, in my opinion. So, I was looking, if you're looking at ways to, encourage other protections, if you, provided additional tree shade beyond what you needed, or if you're providing additional wetland protection or some of those things on the backside of the site, and you could use that as a bonus option to be able to reduce your sidewalks. So basically you pull your buildings up to the streets so that you can preserve other things internal to the site. Seems like that would be a fair trade-off or something to consider. And, I'm not suggesting this for arterials or like heavily trafficked streets. I don't necessarily know that that's necessary, but local streets, and in particular, your own network streets. That's kind of always been one of the challenges, is that, on these sites, we're forced to put in these network streets that cut through the site. And not only do we have to provide space for the right of way that those take up, but we also have these giant setbacks that go along with them. And for all intents and purposes, they're largely internal to the site. So those are kind of the aspects of setbacks that I really want to make sure we spend some time thinking about what we're trying to do here. And, setbacks just take away from a lot of the other initiatives and goals that we're trying to preserve and encourage. So far as tree save and environmental protection and density and those kind of things are all important. So I just really think that we need to spend more time thinking about how important setbacks are to the other initiatives that we're trying to achieve here.
Okay. And somebody on the UDO team, correct me if I'm misreading that, but I've called up the table of setbacks, and for example, your example of N2B on local and collector streets, it's a 20-foot setback. Am I looking at that correctly? And keep in mind that that's measured from the future back of curb. So assuming an 8-foot amenity zone and an 8-foot wide sidewalk or a 6-foot wide sidewalk, it's only 4 to 6 feet behind the sidewalk. So it's not a huge setback. It's greater in the N1 because I think, a yard area between the sidewalk and the building is probably more appropriate. But as we get into the N2 and B and C, and N2C on local and collectors, it's only 16 feet, which is basically at the back of the sidewalk.
And back of sidewalk, in my opinion, is, a good spot for that setback to be. But I'm just saying, you casually say 4 foot's not important, but, on sites it sometimes is. And if there's a way to have some flexibility in that, maybe through a bonus program, I think that should be a mechanism that's built into this code.
Yeah, thanks. We'll look into that. I think this is really helpful for us to hear this kind of feedback and
Thank you,
see
Laura.
where we should adjust.
Do we want to go? I think we down to John Friday's comment at 11:52. What is the development bonus meant to achieve? I think Arista answered that one at 11:53. So I think we can, and Marjorie Parker, and everybody say hello to Marjorie Parker. She's a new member. She joined us at our last meeting, but I don't think she was ever properly introduced. So welcome, Marjorie. Glad you're here. Will traffic studies be required in your procedures for the developers building in the neighborhood, especially high density areas? Laura, I think you can probably speak to traffic impact.
Yeah, we have a team that's putting together kind of our initial proposal for subdivision, streets, and infrastructure, and particularly our Department of Transportation is looking at how traffic studies should play into the UDO. So we're definitely looking at that, and we will be back out in a couple of months to talk about that.
Okay. I'm going to skip over to Thomas's other setback because I think we've talked about that. And Arista or Laura, jump in if I'm just kind of scrolling through my comments here. We've got some comments on building height from some of our designers, and I think that Arista had maybe responded, but let me read the comment. The 40-foot maximum height that we're proposing in a couple of these districts is sometimes difficult for 3-story buildings if height is continued to be measured to the top of the roof from the average grade. And I think we've figured a 40-foot height in a residential district would allow you a 3-story building with either a flat roof or a fairly shallow pitch roof.
That's not a suburban application of roof type, though. For some architecture.
Yeah, and I think for a townhome, well, yeah,
even garden multifamily is typically more of not a flat roof.
Right.
I think that's something we can definitely go back and look at, and maybe and I know there's some other approaches folks have been looking at, but maybe, if you have a roof, you get some more, and I'm probably going to make our consultants cringe as I say some of this, but maybe they're just some somewhat different ways to look at this. So, I mean, that's exactly why we're here, is for you guys to go, hey, what about this? This doesn't quite work right. So,
yeah.
And I don't know, Arista and Chris, if you guys want to.
Yeah, just to speak a little bit about it, and I'm not going to commit to anything, and you didn't make us cringe. We know that the current building height measurement stuff is complicated, can be inconsistent, and I know that we're working with zoning staff to come up with something that's a lot easier. I saw some comment in here at some point where they talked about measuring to the midpoint. That's a very common one to allow a little bit more roof on top. This is just something we'll go back in those details and kind of work with obviously the UDO team and the zoning staff to kind of nail down a building height measurement that works.
Yeah, I think our intention was to allow for a 3-story apartment building or even a townhome in all of these N2 districts at a minimum. So if the numbers don't work and equate well to those types of, those forms, then we'll probably have to look at adjusting. Matt Langston wants to know if you can cantilever upper stories out over your setback. No.
Not as currently proposed.
Yeah. I mean,
and a lot of times that is going to put you out over the public right of way and in conflict with trees. So if there's specific examples or situations where you think maybe that could work, that would be really helpful for us. Sorry, Alan, I just kind of jumped in.
No, that's okay. I was going to say we currently have provisions for, I think, encroaching into setbacks with upper story balconies by a couple of feet, but not entire floors of livable space. Okay. Let's see. Arista's talked about the working on the definition for height. So we're going to skip through that. Nate at 1156 commented that building length should relate to block structure. Once we see the subdivision chapter of the UDO, that they can provide more feedback on that. Eric, to clarify, wants clarification that the non-residential standards apply to the other allowed types and then to like civic uses. Yes, they would. They would apply to all of those non-residential uses like places of worship or other, park buildings, perhaps. Those other types of civic uses.
And they could apply for the bonus height.
I think so.
I was just curious, like for churches and steeples and heights like that, if that applies.
Well, we
or higher
specifically,
schools.
yeah, we specifically have omitted certain architectural features from our height calculation, and that includes things like steeples, so that, your church could be, 48 feet tall, but your steeple could maybe be another 15 feet taller on top of that. And we wouldn't count that steeple, much like we don't count other kinds of, elements of the, that aren't really part of the heated space of the building. We don't count, for example, stair towers that protrude above the roof are not included in the, what are some other examples, Arista, of things that aren't counted toward height? You're muted, Arista.
Steeples are one of those that are generally kind of the easiest example. There'll be a certain area for, say, penthouse utility equipment that may be located on the top of a building. Other examples, for single family house, and maybe something like a chimney that's not counted as part of the overall height. So there's a variety of things that kind of fall into that that category. And that, again, as part of building height, as we're refining that measurement, we'll be very clear about those types of appurtenances that can kind of pierce the height maximum that we have.
And thank you, Arista. At 1158, the comment from Thomas, can the preserved open space be provided as a reduced percentage than improved open space? For example, 8% of tree save open space rather than 10% improved open space. We hadn't talked about that yet, to my knowledge. So make that comment, provide that comment to us when you provide your written comments.
Yeah, I spent way too much time on the TCAP board, so I'm thinking about environmental incentives. So yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Can parking be to the side of the building as well, as long as they are not in front of the main building face? Chris and Arista, I know we've even got a diagram somewhere that talks about this in the draft.
Right. There is the diagram that talks about how it can be placed along the side, just because our understanding working with the UDO team is that something that can happen commonly in Charlotte. And so I don't know if you want me to try and bring it up, but it is something that we are addressing.
Yeah, no, not now. They'll everybody will see it once we send the draft out for people to look at. But just wanted to let you know that yes, we've talked about that and we have addressed that in the draft ordinance at some point. And Arista, I want you to stay on, or Chris, to talk about why we're measuring height in feet rather than in stories. David Walters has asked, wouldn't it be better to control height by stories rather than by a set number?
I don't know. I know Chris is around, but I don't know if he wants to speak to it. I mean, this is something we can talk about. We have, kind of seen it elsewhere where they've done stuff in stories, but, for many reasons, most places still seem to choose to go with just a general overall height, providing that flexibility. You can put your stories in however you want to. I mean, I do understand. I saw there was a comment in here, nobody's going to build 20-foot stories. Totally understandable. But, you know, people don't intuitively understand story. They understand story numbers intuitively, but they don't necessarily see how that works when it's as built. It's the idea of, I think somebody mentioned, it's, you know, a 2-story house that's bigger than my 2-story house is kind of, it can confuse people and they don't like it. With height and the way that we're treating things like triplexes, that if they can fit in the envelope that we've got for single family, they can be located there. I think you're better off working with feet than you are with stories, in particular, because we're allowing this full variety of different development types, even things like a quadruplex. If you go straight to stories, you could get a tall quadruplex if it goes all the way up. So that's one of the things. But this is something that we can, you know, kind of continue to look at and evaluate.
I agree with that.
I'm going to start with, it's completely different than the building code. So I don't understand why we measure it completely different at the building department than at the city's land development office. So if you keep it in height, at the very least, it's way too complicated. So you should check the city's or the county's building requirements for height.
Okay.
And at 11:59 and noon, Thomas and Jim Merrifield talk about facing public paths. The pedestrian entrance to a street or path, is that meant to apply to garden apartments? So,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, why is that tough, Thomas? In
Okay.
10
All right.
words or less.
10 words or less. Huntersville does it. It's very tough. So on a breezeway building, you have, you know, normally 4 different prominent entrances to the building. 2 of them are out to the street, typically the way we organize things, and then 2 of them are to the parking lot. So that means that between the parking lot and the face of the building, I have to find a way to get a greenway system through there. So that just starts spreading things out even further, and I don't see a true benefit of providing a greenway in front of, between people's parking and their front door of their unit.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we may need to clarify this, because this is thinking about a development that has many buildings where you have a building that is not street facing, that's not abutting the street, that then you would have that relationship to the greenway.
Yeah, that clarification
path.
is fine. If it's one or the other, that's fine, but it's when you're putting both of them. When it just says primary entrance, that means any of them, and these breezeway buildings have many primary entrances.
I think that's a good point, and I'm not sure how we have it written right now, and if we don't have it written the way I just said it, I think that's something we can go back and look at.
Okay.
And that kind of touches on Matt's comment at 12 o'clock about there will be a hierarchy if you abut a street and a path, must you face the street first? Okay, I don't hear anybody jumping in on that, so I'm going to keep rolling. David Walters continuing his argument for measuring height in stories. And Nate, can we ask questions at some point? Well, yep, obviously we've been doing that, but we will stop at some point and ask questions. I'm just trying to roll through these written comments in chat, and thank you everybody. You've made given us a lot of feedback, and I see I've got 21 new messages on my screen that I haven't even been able to scroll down to yet. So you guys are probably way ahead of me. And we do have a conversation about measuring height in feet versus stories. So we talked about that. Jim Merrifield at 12:03 wanted to know how existing conditional plans will be treated. And you probably made that comment, Jim, before I got to that slide that covered that. So hopefully you've had that question answered. If not, chime in.
Yes, no, I asked it before you got to it. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jim. John Friday, past discussions on height. Okay, so we've talked about that a little bit. And John's been on the planning board and probably has had some conversations about that over the years. Let's see. David Walters at 1204. We're still back to height, so we're going to keep going. I'll try to find some comments that don't relate to height, feet versus stories.
Okay, Alan, I won't post anymore.
No, don't let me discourage you at all. No, it's just that
we record all these.
yeah, I'm now just catching up because I was working on advancing the slides and I wasn't really seeing the comments as they came in. So you guys are probably 20 comments ahead of me. I'm just now trying to catch up and make sure that we talk about all of the ones that need to be talked about. Okay, so again, Thomas at 1205, helpful to see what current zoning types would equate to. Okay, I think we've talked about that. Nate at 1205. Nate, do you still have a question on the 30-acre mixed dwelling type?
Yeah.
Or would you rather talk offline about that?
No, I'll just make a comment. We don't have to get into it. I guess I'd be curious on the metrics you came up with. I think the acreage makes sense, but when you, for example, this is predominantly going to be, you need to do townhomes or single family in addition to apartments. And I can't think of many examples that have over 30% townhomes with apartments, just because of the density change that you get from townhomes or single family to multifamily. It would take up a majority of the site. Commonwealth is probably 5% or less, but it's a lot of the site area. Or there's a Crescent rezoning that's in Ballantyne. It's 10% townhomes, but it's half the site acreage. So I don't know if you're trying to accomplish a diversity as in you're driving down the streets and you see diverse product types. You might want to look at a metric that's more site area and less number of units, because the math doesn't work the way you've presented it right now.
Yeah, that I think is a good comment, and that's been a concern that I've had as well. So if you're telling us that we need to go back and look at that, then yeah, we will take a look at that. I think I hear you on that as well, that they really would spread out your development if you've got to provide a third of your units in lower density types, dwelling types. So yeah, we'll go back and take a look at that and maybe try to test that a little bit. And if you've got examples that you'd like to bring to our attention, kind of illustrate your concerns, we'd be happy to look at that too.
Alan, could you do us a favor? So Nate kind of mentioned it a little bit of saying, what's the goal here? And I think as we kind of focus on this a little bit, it might be helpful to kind of understand where you guys are trying to get to, so we can try to help think of a way to get you there without undermining development options.
I'm going to defer a little bit to Laura on this, and because I think she can speak a little more eloquently to what we're trying to accomplish with this.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I want to go back and I don't have it right now, but shoot it out to you guys. The place types for neighborhood 2 do talk about larger sites not having a singular dwelling type on them. And so that we don't end up with something that is just, tens of acres of exactly the same thing, that we do provide housing diversity. But let me go find the exact language after this meeting and get it. We'll get it out with follow-up.
Yeah, and one thing that we've talked about is trying to avoid something that we've been seeing before, which is just a huge monolithic townhome development without any diversity of building types, that you get, just acres and acres. Although we did up the area from 10 acres to 30 acres because we heard your comments at our last meeting, but perhaps we didn't quite get it entirely right.
Yeah, I think if you run the math, you're going to end up with a majority of the site being townhomes and single family.
Yeah.
Even though it's a third of the use.
Yeah.
Might have the
When we talk about area, though, it gets a little tricky because, you know, you've got parking, surface parking areas presumably to figure into that calculation and how you deal with that. So that's why we went with units, I think, versus square footage or acreage.
Alan, as a way to kind of help your thinking on those calculations a little bit, just kind of keep in mind that for an apartment project to be viable, 200 is the minimum, 250 is the ideal. So, and 300 is the top end. So that's the range that when you're kind of doing that math, kind of keep that in mind, that that's what these sites need to be able to achieve to have apartments on them.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Marjorie at 1210, our concern in Hidden Valley is that multifamily homes will be built in the midst of our single family home because the property is available. We are concerned for seniors. We're getting apartments on the outskirts, but there's talk of building apartments amid the single family homes. I'm not familiar with the issue, Marjorie, and are we seeing rezonings in Hidden Valley that are rezoning single family neighborhoods to multifamily to allow for these apartment buildings? Marjorie, I don't know if you're on with us still or not, or whether you're muted. Yes, Marjorie.
Yes, we do have a on Yuma and Muncie streets in Hidden Valley. We have I think it's in litigation right now because of the deed restriction that's on the books for the single family homes. There were apartments. Some property was bought in 10 homes were bought in Hidden Valley on those streets to build apartments right at the front of the neighbors. And so my concern is that might set a precedence for, there are a couple lots like next door to me might be empty, and then all of a sudden we start getting apartments. I'm concerned about safety and traffic. We don't have an issue. We know that there are apartments being built because of the light rail on the outskirts on Sugar Creek, which we feel is too many because we can't get out of the neighborhood. Well, that's another concern. But we're just concerned that people may start purchasing the homes that are available and get the best bang, the developers getting the best bang for their money and just build apartment units.
One way I think to answer that concern is that depending on how that area is mapped for place types after the comprehensive plan is adopted and we map the city for place types, if those areas are mapped as a neighborhood 1, which is our lower intensity residential place type, unless those sites are on an arterial street, if they're just on a local neighborhood street, we wouldn't have a zoning district that would allow anything more than a triplex to be built on those streets. As you probably know, because you were here at our last meeting, the comprehensive plan recommends that we allow single family duplex and triplex dwellings to be built on any lot in any residential neighborhood if it fits within the lot. So if that area is mapped as a neighborhood 1, then it could be up to a triplex. But so I think it depends a little bit on how those areas are mapped. It's important. Laura, can you jump in and add anything, or have you seen any rezonings in that area that would, that are similar to what Marjorie has talked about?
I mean, Alan, I think you hit it. Not to say we haven't had rezonings in that area, but with the comprehensive plan and having new policy and the place type mapping and following up with zoning to align with that, I think we'll will probably end up in a different place. And I would just suggest to anyone that's a neighborhood rep being involved in what the comprehensive plan is recommending, and particularly the place type mapping piece, which is going to remap our community from a policy perspective. It's going to be really important.
And it's not that I'm since I've been on here and hearing the process that you're planning, I don't necessarily disagree, with the process. I think I like the idea of like the mixed area with the grocery stores and all of that. I'm just saying when an area is already built we had Yuma, the houses on Yuma, it was rezoned to accommodate multifamily when it was a single family area. But it's in court now because the residents took it to court because of the deed, the restriction in the deed said single family homes are 1 and a story homes only. And so it's in court now being, fought through. That's when it's right. And the duplex and the triplex, that's okay. But to build apartment units, now there is a R17 zoning on Tom Hunter Road, and we do have apartments across the street. However, there have been talk of, and I don't have the facts, so I'm going to get the facts. There have been talk of that they were going to rezone the part that's the Hidden Valley residential area to build apartments across the street. And that, so when he said, when Alan said about the R17 will be placed by I believe the N2, which is lesser density, N2B, which was lesser density, and as long as it hadn't gone to city council and been approved. Now that's probably going to help us in that area because the apartments are across the street, which is fine. On Tom Hunter, they've been there for years, as long as I've been out here, which is 40 years. The coming across the street to the residential area and buying up the single family homes to build more apartments is a little concerning to us as seniors.
And that's why I think you and other neighborhood folks, and I mean, everyone involved, but particularly property owners are going to want to be involved in that place type mapping, because that's going to be the guide for zoning in the future. So, and be glad to kind of talk about that some more if you want to, Marjorie.
Yes, I do want to discuss that, and we can do it offline. Okay. I want to discuss the place type mapping. Actually, we have our Hidden Valley Community Association Zoom meeting, so maybe I can get someone on the from the UDO. Maybe I can get someone to come and discuss, especially that.
Yeah, we'd be glad to, and it may be the comp plan team, but we'll we'll be back in touch on this one.
Okay, very good. We meet the first Tuesday, so I'm gonna see if I can't. Laura, let me know when, give me some dates, because I know you all are busy. I've retired from the city, so I know you all are busy down there.
Yeah, I'll talk to Alicia and Kathy who are managing that. So. Okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'm going to pick up where Alan left off. I'm hoping I'm catching everything. Some of the things have been answered already in writing, so I'm scrolling down. I think I'm at 12:17. I think we had a lot of conversation about height and stories. And so Walter had a comment about, is there something magic about 40 feet? It's kind of what we start with in a lot of cases now, but obviously we're going to be going back and looking at height versus stories and how to handle that. John Friday also some comments on basically flat roofs versus sloped roofs and how we deal with that. Yeah, I'd like Nate, the encroachments. We actually, and maybe we didn't say this real clearly in here, that we are, our intent is, and Chris and Arista, stop me if I'm wrong, to allow those encroachments, the 4 to 6 foot encroachments for stoops and steps and so forth. I don't know if that's hitting your issue or not. If not, definitely put in the chat that I've missed it. Again, more comments about height, church spires, and right away and trees trump this. So, Thomas, you had a comment at 12:20. Do you mind just talking us through that? What your
Can you summarize what I said at 12:20? I don't remember.
Sorry, yeah. It says, agreed, Nate. TOD does a good job of clarifying that the right-of-way and trees trump this.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that was just kind of saying, because one of the pushbacks was saying like, well, there are other things that are important about, you know, you don't want to hang over right-of-ways, and that was about the cantilevering thing. And I was kind of saying that, you know, TOD already kind of works on that pretty well with some language that, you know, that there are some, you can do this, but these other things are important and would trump it. And if you go over, you know, so I was just kind of mentioning that you've kind of already done that work to some degree, and you might just kind of pull that language over to some element.
Thank you. That's a good point. Matt Langston, I think we were talking a bit about height again and a roof terrace. So we will go back and look at that comment about current ordinance allows a certain percentage of the footprint to not count toward a full floor. So I think we'll have to look at that right now. I think it really depends on which standard that's applying to. For affordable housing, for example, for the height bonus and TOD, anything over the footprint counts. I think we'll have to look at this a little more broadly. David Walters talked about height again, about the ventilation systems. It's really a very good point. So thank you. I think we'll talk about the text availability soon. And we will, I'm going to say this and see if I hear anything from Kevin, but we will post this, the meeting online. It will probably be early next week. Oh, that was to me directly. But anyway, Matt wanted to know when we're going to be posting this online. So it'll be early next week. About at the same time that we will be getting the very preliminary draft, which may not have responded to all of the issues in here. So I just want to put that caveat in there when you see it and say, we talked about this. In order to get this out to you all quickly, we may not have, we will not have made changes based on today's conversation. Let's see. Yeah, and Rebecca, I think that's a good comment. And I know Kathy has joined us. Kathy wrote a comment that we had some conversation first from Marjorie about, we talked about place type mapping, and Rebecca has said that maybe neighborhood reps can have a meeting about the rural neighborhoods will play in mapping neighborhoods. So, and I know you guys have been talking to some neighborhoods already. Just point that out. Let's see. I think we're
at the end of our chat comments.
Yes. Going once.
Yeah, Laura, this is Kathy. I mean, we are, as far as the place type mapping, we are working on the methodology right now. And we have a schedule that we're working through internally that has a public engagement process with it. But, you know, just for everyone's knowledge, we won't start place type mapping until after the adoption of the comprehensive plans. We all have to agree on what we're mapping. And that's what's in the plan. And we are hoping that will be adopted in April. And if we have the methodology worked out, then we'll be able to start mapping immediately thereafter, probably in May or June or something like that.
Thank you, Kathy. I didn't know how much of the conversation you'd had a chance to hear. So I think, Alan, I'm not seeing any more comments. You want to flip to the next slide?
Yes, here we go.
So I think there've been maybe some questions out there about, hey, we have these meetings. What is happening to our feedback? We've had, so we really have two kinds of feedback, and we want to tell you that it has not been lost, and tell you how it is being used. So one is after every time we provide a preview at one of the OAC meetings of a section of the ordinance, a very drafty proposed section, we send that out. Hopefully all of you guys remember this, and ask for written comments. And we will be doing that again, likely Monday at latest Tuesday of next week, and ask for your feedback on what we provided you. We'll give you probably be 3 weeks. That's typically, I think, what we've done most recently. And with those written comments, as we get a next draft out, we will review the written comments, take them into consideration. And if you took the time to provide us something in writing, we will, with that next draft, provide you a response in writing. So that is, I'm just going to say, the best way for us to make sure that we capture your comments. And we've gotten some feedback that some things are going to be, there may be additional comments when you see everything as a package, and we certainly understand that. But anything that you can give us, particularly in writing now, we will, we're going to take into account. And if you, again, if you take the time to put it in writing for us, we will get back with you. And we've done that with very early, some of the early districts we reviewed, and we will continue to do that. So we also have the meetings, and we get a lot of good chat, either through the chat function or verbal discussion during the OAC meetings. So we are obviously looking at this, considering this, well, maybe not obviously, but hopefully it will be obvious when you see another draft. And we will look at those comments, and from a staff recommendation perspective, consider the comments, and as we are updating these districts and pulling together the full zoning component. We won't necessarily, because there's so much coming through, and we've discussed a lot of it, we won't be giving a specific written response, but just to tell you guys, we are listening, we're reviewing, we're going back through, and as we'll be adjusting the draft, we are using these comments. And one, I mean, it may seem kind of small, but Alan showed that we've combined the twin homes and duplexes into a single use. I think there will be, maybe that's not the most impactful change, but we think an important change, and for clarity. And you will see other changes. If we're off base on something, that we please, as much as you can get to us in writing will be really helpful. So that's what are we doing with your comments? We've got a lot of comments and a lot we're trying to put together. And so if you haven't seen anything yet, that doesn't mean you won't see anything down the road. So next step is we will be sending out the neighborhood 2 kind of preliminary draft that we have given you a preview of today, next week. And with the survey, hoping that we know folks are busy, but if there are things you feel really strongly about, this is as good a time as any the best time to do that. And then we will be back on February 18th to discuss special purpose zoning districts. And you may wonder what those are. They are historic district, airport overlay, manufactured housing overlay, and a conservation overlay district. So that is what I have for today. And Walter's asked, has the draft of neighborhood one been sent out yet? Yes, we sent that back, I think in November.
Yes, it was a couple of days after the November meeting. I don't have the date in front of me, but it was sent out, and what you're seeing on the screen now is actually what you would see if you clicked on the link in the email that we sent you. It would take you to the survey as well as to the draft of the neighborhood 1 districts.
So, ask the question. Let's see, Ty, I don't know if you're still on, or Allison, to wrap us up for today.
Yes, I am. I was just about to jump off for another, but so time is good. Good discussions, and appreciate everyone once again for making sure that your voices are heard. I wasn't really answering, but I was looking at a lot of the comments, and hopefully some of our questions were able to address those. Major is a good addition to us. So I think we have another resource that can really help us respond to you timely and promptly when you have questions. So please, this should not be the end of engagement. You can email Alan or Laura or anyone on their team as we progress through this process. So once again, thank you very much for spending your lunchtime with us today. We appreciate it, and see you again soon.
Thank you, Ty. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.